It's been almost a year and a half since the Sony FX30 has been released, and in that time we've seen many new cameras come out. Today we're going to talk about 21 things that I like about this camera, and also talk about 3 things that I don't really like about this camera, and I'll let you know if I think it's worth it or not in 2024. Now the FX30 is essentially an FX3 body with an APS-C or Super 35 sensor, and it's packed with some amazing features for its price. So let's get into it and start with the obvious one, and that's that the FX30 has an internal cooling fan. This is actually one of the main reasons why I bought it, and this fan is a game changer. As someone who records for long sessions at a time, even uses it as a webcam for a couple hours at a time, it does such a great job at keeping this camera cool. This paired up with the camera's no record limit essentially means that you can record until your battery dies out or you run out of storage. You won't have to worry about overheating issues with this camera because of that internal fan. Now you can hardly hear the fan, and I do leave it on all the time even during recording. But you can also control the fan, which is pretty cool if you do have a sensitive microphone. You can decide whether or not you want it on all the time, or maybe you just want it on when you're not recording and off when you are recording. The FX30 can also shoot at 4K 120 and at 240 frames per second in full HD. Now when choosing all your video settings, you can also shoot in 422 10-bit on the FX30, which is honestly a game changer when compared to 8-bit. It just means you'll have a lot more color data and information to work with in post. You'll be able to push and pull colors a lot more, and colors will take a lot more manipulating and adjusting to break apart. Now the 4K in this camera is oversampling from its 26 megapixel 6K sensor, which means you're still getting a 4K resolution, but it will appear sharper than cameras like the FX3 or A7S III, which use a 12 megapixel sensor. Now, even though the FX30 is considered a cinema camera, it can still take photos. It only has an electronic shutter, not a mechanical shutter, and it can't shoot in continuous or burst, only in single shot. So I wouldn't consider this camera a hybrid camera, but if you need to take BTS photos or YouTube thumbnails, or you're out and about and the FX30 is all you have, you can still take really good photos with this camera. Here's a shot that I took of the Golden Gate Bridge with the FX30. The FX30 has in-body image stabilization, but it also collects gyro data, which is basically the position coordinates of the sensor so that you can better stabilize footage later in post. I've had the shakiest footage that I've applied warp stabilizer to, and honestly, it just made the footage so much worse with all the warping in the corners, literally thinking my footage was ruined. And then I brought it into Sony Catalyst Browse, imported the clip, clicked on stabilize, and it used all of that gyro data to stabilize my footage way better than warp stabilizer ever will. It's honestly a game changer if you do shoot a lot of handheld stuff. If we have to talk about some of my favorite things that you don't really see in most other cameras, it would have to be the tally lights on this camera. For those who don't know what tally lights are, they're basically a light that comes on to let you know when you are recording. On the FX30, we have 3 of them, and they're positioned so that whichever angle you're looking at the camera from, you can tell that you are recording. So we have one right here on the record button itself. We have one on the back at the very top here, and at the very front of the camera, if you're filming videos like I am, you have one right here. There have been so many times I thought I was recording on my A7 IV just to find out I forgot to click the record button. With the FX30, it is nearly impossible to make this mistake with all of the tally lights. The FX30 also has a ton of 1/4-20 mounting holes that are honestly a game changer. I know I've been saying it a lot, but I've been using these mounting holes for everything. To shoot vertical content without a cage, because I can just mount a tripod plate to the 1/4-20 mounts that are on each side of the camera. I can mount it to my car's suction cup mount to get a unique looking shot. I can attach it for this top-down overhead shot using a friction arm, and basically I can attach tripod plates, friction arms, Arca Swiss plates to just about anywhere on the camera because of these mounting holes. Now, another one of my favorite things is the record button at the front of the FX30. Because I like to make videos like this and I'm almost always in front of the camera, to have a button right on the front that I can reach so easily without having to reach over and find the button is just one little thing that makes this filming experience just a little bit easier. Now, the FX30 also has Cine EI. If you look at the more expensive Sony cameras like the FX6 and the FX3, you'll find Cine EI. Essentially, it's a tool to help you expose properly and maximize the dynamic range of your camera and S-Log3. First thing it'll do is lock in your ISO so you can only use your native dual base ISO, which on the FX30 is 800 and 2500. It does this so you can get the most dynamic range and the least amount of noise in your image. Then you can change the Cine EI value to make the camera's LCD display the scene darker or brighter. Note that it doesn't change the brightness or the ISO of your image or your final footage when you're looking at it in post. If you want to learn a little bit more about Cine EI, because it is a little bit confusing and you want to figure out exactly how it works, my friend Kofi actually made a really good video on it. You can check it out up here. Which takes me to my next point, and that's that the FX30 has the ability to load your own LUTs into the camera. This is great if you have your own LUT pack or a LUT pack from your favorite creator. Mine is coming soon, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But you can load them right into the FX30 through an SD card and then monitor your footage with the LUT on it. Now, when you import your footage onto your computer, it will still be in log and the LUT is not applied. The LUT is simply just to see how your footage will look with your LUT after you throw it on in post. However, you can decide with the FX30 if you want to bake in that LUT into your footage so that you can speed up your workflow later in post. Now, the FX30, like most Sony cameras, also use Sony's E-mount, which means you have so many lens options to choose from. You can choose between native Sony glass to third-party glass like Sigma, or even super cheap, crappy lenses from those random companies. I've personally been using this Sigma 10 to 18 millimeter f2.8 for basically all of my content in the last 3 months. It's extremely wide, and after that 1.5 APS-C crop, it becomes basically a 15 to 27 millimeter, perfect for things like vlogging and videos like this. Then paired up with the 18 to 50 millimeter f2.8, also from Sigma, this is just the perfect 24 to 70 alternative for APS-C. Now, like I said at the beginning, the FX30 uses an APS-C sensor, which has its perks. It means its lenses are much more affordable, smaller, lighter, and take up less space. Just look at the size of this 18 to 50 millimeter for the FX30 versus a 24 to 70 for my full frame. Now, that's not to say you can't use full frame lenses on this camera. If you already have full frame lenses, you definitely can still use them. You just need to apply that same 1.5 times crop to any lens you put on this FX30. The FX30 also has 2 card slots, which are both multi-card slots, which you can use CF Express Type A cards, or you can use regular SD cards. So if you're like, CF Express Type A cards are a little bit too expensive, you can just use regular SDs if you really want to. The only thing to keep in mind is that if you want to take advantage of the highest quality settings and the highest bit rate and the highest codecs, using a CF Express Type A card will allow you to do that. On the other side, we have our ports, and the FX30 has a full-size HDMI port. This is something that we've been seeing Sony doing in almost all cameras, but for some reason, some other manufacturers aren't doing it, like Canon is still using micro HDMI ports for whatever reason. But I do like that Sony is doing this because they're just much more durable and less susceptible to damage. Now, if you're someone who live streams or uses their camera as a webcam, I honestly don't think there is a better camera out there. There's a lot of cameras that are capable of live streaming, but a lot tend to heat up over time. Because of the FX30's built-in fan, you can stream for hours without worrying about any heating issues. All you have to do is turn your camera on, plug it in via USB-C, and that's it. I actually used this in a recent video, you can check it out up here, where I talked to my friend Anthony and Taha about content creation, and I had the FX30 hooked up in under 30 seconds and never had any issues. Now the layout of the buttons, the custom buttons themselves, the big record button, the power stick, the joystick, all of these feel really, really good. I feel like everything is exactly where it should be on this camera. I also like how all the custom buttons are already named and set from factory, so you literally don't have to change anything. You literally have a button for your white balance, your ISO, your zebras, your peaking. Now, if you're someone who uses timecode for weddings and things like that, the FX30 does have timecode in via a microphone like the Rode wireless mics, or it's multi-port with the timecode adapter. It has Sony's focus breathing compensation like most Sony cameras, and that works on most new Sony lenses. It also has the multi-interface hot shoe, so you can use things like the XLR handle, but also other accessories like the Sony microphone that doesn't use cables and it just hooks up through the hot shoe, which is pretty cool. And lastly, price. The FX30 is priced so well for everything you get. It's a cinema camera, a Netflix approved cinema camera. It has features like timecode, built-in LUTs, 4K 120, internal fan. This camera is absolutely stacked with features and it only comes in at $1,800. However, it does have its flaws. Since I've had this camera, I've noticed a few things that I don't quite like. First being the noise. If you have a lot of darks in your scene, like for example, I have this black wall behind me, I typically wear black shirts, I found even if exposed properly and using my native ISO 800 or 2500, I still get noise in my shadows. So unless I'm shooting outside or with a lot of light, I have to favor my shadows using Cine EI to avoid some of that noise. Typically after a color grade, you can't really see it anymore. Almost just looks like film grain, but it is definitely there. I'm not gonna say that you don't get noise. Second, we have the crop in 4K 120. I know I talked about how good 4K 120 is, and it is nice to have, but for some people, the 4K 120 can be a little much. You get a 1.5 times crop when shooting in 4K on top of the 1.5 times APS-C crop with whatever lens you use. Personally, the crop doesn't bother me too much because I already factor in that 1.5 times crop with whatever lens I'm putting on, so I don't figure or factor this in as a secondary crop, and all I have to think about is that extra 1.5 times crop when I'm shooting in 4K 120. But I can see how switching out lenses and keeping the same distance between your subject and not having to reframe everything can be an issue for some. And lastly, there's no waveforms or false color. Now, I know I'm expecting a lot from a camera that is sub $2,000, but it would have been nice to have this considering it is part of Sony's cinema line. Waveforms and false color just make exposing your scene so much easier than using something like your histogram or exposure meter. Personally, I love the FX30, and I don't think there is a camera on the market at this price that has an internal fan, all of these features, and has Sony's amazing and reliable autofocusing system. I bought this camera as my B cam to my A7 IV, and since then it has quickly become my A cam that I've been using for every single video and all of my content in the last few months. If you're someone who is looking for a great cinema video focused camera, but doesn't want to spend a lot of money to get a camera like the FX3, the FX30 is a great choice and I would highly recommend it. Even if you're in the position to buy the FX3, like I was, the value for what you get just makes so much more sense with the FX30. And if you know that you won't need the low light benefits that the FX3 has to offer, there's no point of spending the extra $2,000. Yeah, but the FX30 is APS-C. Personally, I wouldn't worry about APS-C. Technology has gotten way better, and APS-C is not nearly as bad as it used to be. I was always that type of person that said after I switched to full frame, I will never go back to APS-C. But after going with the FX30, I don't regret it at all. It's still very capable in low light situations and comes with a lot of perks like lenses being way cheaper, lighter, and easier to travel with. This is a clip shot with my A7 IV, and this is a clip shot with my FX30, and you can hardly tell which one was shot with full frame and which one was shot with APS-C. That being said, I hope that helps. If you are on the fence and not sure if you want to pull the trigger on the FX30 or not, make sure to leave this video a like. It really does help the channel grow, and make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one.